Good morning, everybody. I'm sorry we're a little late here, but as you know, it's not our fault. It just ran longer, and that's it. So I'd like to call the meeting to order, and the first order of business, please, is the approval of the minutes of our November 15th meeting, and we have a second, we have a proposal, and vote, please. Okay, minutes are approved. Committee works plan, Doug?
Mr. Chairman, with public speakers?
Said there were none.
Did you give me a place to sign up? I've been asking for an hour.
Mr. Murray Bowden will be our first public speaker.
Mr. Chairman, it's time that each position at the board had an electrical outfit so that you could plug your cell phone in. Not very funny, and I think that each of you should consider bringing your computer here, because all of that paper that's been passed out here could appear on your computer as an electronic book. You could have gotten it beforehand. I could have gotten the late-breaking stuff downloaded wirelessly, and it's time. The other thing is, don't be bashful. Sometimes people forget to turn their microphones on. I would rather somebody on the board remind to turn the mic on than I do it from over there. It's not polite if I do it from there. The other most serious point is that you've limited me to a certain few minutes of time. It's time to limit all of the presentations to all of these meetings to 5 minutes. They can either tighten it up or learn how. It goes on and on and on. They don't have to repeat everything that's on the screen. If you gave it to us electronically beforehand, we could deal with it. So it's time to tighten the meetings up, and so we don't have the situation where everything runs on and on and on and everybody repeats themselves. It's been a pleasure to work here. This has been a rehearsal because in January I get to go to Washington and talk to the people who write the manual on traffic control devices, 150 traffic engineers who don't want to change either, who don't want to put their information on electronic books and want to keep doing it the same way they always did it here. Well, there. It's time to recognize this is the new age. My grandchildren forced me to get a texting phone because that's how I communicate with them. Emily, who is now 12, wants to come to an MTA meeting and discuss and present something. Last time they were here was 5 years ago. Daniel spoke. Now Emily wants to speak. A very nice holiday to you all.
Doug, committee work plan.
Sir, there are no changes to the work plan.
That was quick. Now, the budgets, finance watch.
In December, we don't do a budget watch. We'll have a special year-end flash budget report in January. And the next item would be Finance Watch with Pat McCoy.
Thanks. Finance Watch appears in your committee materials on Roman numeral 4-1. We do have two transactions to report. The first is issuance of transportation revenue bonds to pay off CP1, Commercial Paper Series 1. And this transaction was priced the same day as the conversion of $250 million of transportation revenue bonds 2005 Series G. We handled both of these on the same day, on November 23rd. And as you can see on the statistics on the next page, the all-in TIC on the commercial paper takeout was 5.15%. On the remarketing, it was 4.34%. The average life reflecting the bonds that we issued on the commercial paper, we issued 30-year level debt. On the 2005 G remarketing, we left the amortization schedule as it was. We had both transactions were handled by our underwriting group led by Citigroup and J.P. Morgan, and we had Ramirez and Siebert Branford Schenck working on the transaction as special co-senior managers. I think just a little commentary on the transaction. There was a strong interest in the bonds across the yield curve, except for that middle part of those maturities, 2024, 2025, 2026. On the long bonds, we had significant oversubscription, and we were able to reprice the bonds 6 basis points in the long maturity and 7 basis points in the 2025 maturity. We did have an investor call and generating a significant investor interest in the transaction, and that went very well. So I'm happy to take any questions on these transactions. Okay, that's Finance Watch. The remaining, our traditional reports are here for your reference on variable rate portfolio and so forth.
Okay, we're going to move to MTA headquarters and all agency items. There are 4 action items, including 1 walk-on. The first item we're going to look at is the 2011 budget adoption material, and that comes in a separate document, and our CFO, Bob Foran, is here to talk about it.
Thank you very much, Doug. So in this separate book, we'll be discussing just the headquarters consolidated budget. Behind it is the information that you heard from each of the committees earlier today. Let me just first say that this document really summarizes the presentation that we made to the board in November when we went over the July plan and updated it. And at that time, it reaffirmed the MTA's commitment to make every dollar count and also to try to stabilize our finances. As we noted both in July and also in November, the MTA's finances still remain precarious. In the summary that you have here, page 1-2, or I-3 rather, we do kind of summarize with the bottom line. And the bottom line is in November we showed you that the 2010 and 2011 margins are very narrow, very, very small. And we've shown increased deficits in the out years. And those increased deficits are primarily a result of the re-estimates that we've made for the pension expenses going forward. Between 11 and 14, the increased pension costs are about $470 million as we estimate. And so, of course, that's going to affect our projected cash balances and the cash deficits going forward. The recommendation that the staff is putting forth to the board today is found on the bottom of 1-3, or I-3. And it's recommended that the board, first of all, adopt the 2011 final proposed budget and the November financial plan for 2011 through 2014. And in so doing, you would be approving the 2011 November forecast, that's this year's budget, or rather this year 2010 budget as adjusted, the general reserve which we are putting in to 2011 and years forward, and all plan adjustments. Those are the adjustments below lines. Also, we ask you to authorize staff under direction of the Chair and CEO to take all necessary actions to implement the subsidy and other technical adjustments that are in the plan. To authorize technical adjustments to agency budgets and forecast of non-material items for the February plan. We ask that you authorize adjustment to agency 2011 budgets and forecasts relating to agreed upon and board-approved labor settlements. And then we ask that you authorize staff under the direction of the Chair and the CEO to take actions in furtherance of ending the subsidy of the Long Island bus deficit as presented in the November plan. Such actions in the discretion of the MTA and Long Island bus Chair or CEO may include, without limitations, continuing negotiations with Nassau County to achieve a new agreement to provide a secure and sufficient flow of funds so that we may continue to operate the existing bus system in Nassau County. Also, to facilitate Nassau County's efforts to assume responsibility for the financial operations of the bus system, including the county's proposed privatization of local bus operations, giving notice of termination of the existing lease and operating agreement between Nassau County and Long Island Bus, and scheduling and conducting public hearings on the reduction or termination of Long Island bus service provided under the existing lease and operating agreement. Additionally, we seek approval of the additional budget and cash management actions that have been done in the past and are included below. And these include the things like the advance of bridge and tunnel surplus, use of MTA MRT2 revenues, those are discretionary revenues, use of regional mobility taxes and other new taxes, again, where we have great discretion, authorize interagency loans, use of a stabilization reserve, which we use to kind of balance funds between our operating subsidies for both transit and commuter, and finally, approve contributions to the Government Accounting Standards Board, or GASB contributions for next year, 2011, of $47 million, and then also to approve any intra- or interagency loans using those funds. So, Mr. Chairman, that's the recommendation to the board.
So fine. What? May we have a motion, please, and then we'll discuss it if there is. And a second, please. Second. Okay. Is there any discussion? Mitch?
I'm on behalf of the Long Island contingent, but especially because Pat is not here. Obviously, we are still hopeful that Nassau County and MTA can reach a satisfactory conclusion so that a number of the alternatives that Bob put out there do not have to happen. In my legislative parlance, it's only Monday. There's still time to make that happen. And as a result of that, I will vote without recommendation on that part of the motion to send it to the board.
May I also just tell everybody that before any action is taken whatsoever regarding the Nassau bus, however it turns out, that'll come back to the Finance Committee and the full board, so this is not a final recommendation on that. Anybody else? Andrew?
So if this gets approved Wednesday, there'll be an orderly, pending an agreement with Nassau County, there'll be just an orderly liquidation of Long Island Bus, or you'll just use the money and have bus service until those funds run out? Or?
Yeah, here's what our plans are. Again, we have to give 60 days notice before we either, terminate service. And we've looked at the finances and we looked to see what the costs and expenses are. And working with senior management of Long Island Bus, we think that if the county continues to provide the funds that are in their budget and continues to provide those funds, we think that we can continue to reduce certain costs. Some may be temporarily, some may actually be a degradation of service, not a service cutback, but a degradation. Maybe things aren't as clean as they would be, but try to cut some cost everywhere we could. To
take the doors off the buses and things like that.
To see if we can just stretch it out until we do have time for the county to come to agreement with us or for the county to be prepared in terms of privatization. But the whole thought is that without us being out of pocket on a net basis for the year, as you know, we have little cash at the beginning of the year, so we're always a little out of pocket. But to not run through costs that we don't think we're going to be able to recoup, we think we can do that and be able to keep it running, so that we have a chance to work. I'd rather not say how long that can happen because, again, that will depend on how quickly the county will advance us their funds and what we decide is the proper and appropriate cost reductions. But, again, no, we're really going to try to see if we can create enough time to work something out. The county pays, if you recall, I think it's 9.1 that's in their budget. They have about 6.1 that is really their contribution away from their 18B match. And so we're looking at that 6.1 being the kind of critical amounts if they're willing to advance it.
Suppose they aren't wanting to advance that and, they're going to pay that out to us over some time. I think from a budget standpoint, what we're obliged to come back to the chair, and the chair will come back to you on, is we do have this 60-day notice that we need to give, and as we look to see what the cash flows are, we'll be looking and trying to estimate when do we think we're going to run out of cash on our side. And once we start to identify that, that's when we have to, bring it to Jay's attention, and then it will be Jay's discussion with the board on what happens at that point. But that's how we're planning on managing it. We're going to be trying to do everything we can to stretch it out, but we do have to watch and see when we're going to start running into a deficit, and then we have to bring it back.
If we don't get the 6.1, up front, how long can we go before we're in a cash deficit?
Well, what we really, I don't want to talk specifically about what the funding, but one way of thinking about how they might fund it is they could almost do it on a per diem basis if they wanted. They could give us money just to keep it running per week, per bi-week, per day. So we're willing to work with them to see what kind of funding arrangement might be worked out. But again, that's, I think the important point is we are trying to do what we can to stay with a budget that has no deficit funding, but at the same time gives people a chance to try to work something out if all parties are operating in good faith.
I think that's well said, Bob. Okay, anything, Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Robert, could you do me a favor and just refresh my recollection on the interagency loan to the capital financing fund that is described on page I-2, and just answer the question. Is this or is it not dipping into capital to take care of operating needs?
Yeah, back in 2001, 2002, the board approved taking certain monies that were capital. They were designated for capital. They were not bond proceeds, and said that it would be able to be used for temporary loans to kind of help smooth out the cash flow ups and downs that we have in our budget. But it was still capital dollars. So since that time, there has been almost an annual borrowing for intra-year needs, and then the money's been replenished. We have not needed that money for the capital expenditures up to this point, though we are hearing from capital programs that they are they're anticipating using that money and needing that money. So what the financial plan has in it now is beginning in 2012 that we would begin reducing that borrowing each year by $100 million, in essence repaying that loan by $100 million, so that the time beginning in whatever that works out to 2016, we should be down to where the money's fully available. But that is in the plan every year, beginning 2012.
But absent that, it would have been due now, is that it?
Well, we will pay it back at the end of this year, and we will borrow it at the beginning. What we've really done is we've been using that for working capital purposes for our operating budget. And it's worked out since they haven't needed it for capital immediately. But again, we see the need to have to spend that money for capital. So.
Anything else? Maureen?
I'll make the point that I always make on this topic, Jim, that it's also true that the operating budget pays for debt service, some of the debt service on bonds issued for capital, so it's not exactly a one-way street. Secondly, on energy hedges, there's a lot of talk right now about reforming derivatives practices, and I don't know when we were planning on entering into energy hedges.
Coming up it's on the agenda. We'll talk about it.
Okay.
Hold up on that.
Okay.
Anything else on our budget? Okay, so we have a motion and we have a second. All in favor, please?
Aye.
Okay. Opposed? Would you please mark that? Okay. Budget has been approved. Okay. Pat, I guess you're up next.
On the next item is the selection of the bond underwriters and swap counterparties.
Okay.
Pat?
Thank you. There's a staff summary on Roman numeral 5-1 of the committee book. This is an update, a revised staff summary that the committee saw last month, summarizing the selection of bond underwriters and swap counterparties. We heard concerns of the committee loud and clear last month and went back to the selection committee. And before you is a recommendation to appoint 10 firms as senior managers. So in addition to the 7 that the committee saw last month, added to that would be the firms Morgan Stanley, Wells Fargo, and Jeffries and Company. There's some additional language in here clarifying, I think, a couple points, and I just wanted to point out on the co-manager bracket on page 4. There's now 16 firms in this bracket, down from 3 because 3 have been recommended to be moved up to senior managers. 7 of the 18 firms that proposed a senior manager are recommended for this group. The remaining 9 firms recommended as co-managers originally proposed as senior manager. So, and of that group, 11 are new firms in the co-manager pool. I would, just point out that, we worked very hard to come up with a diverse group. In the senior manager bracket, we do continue to have 2 firms that are state qualified minority-owned business enterprises, and that gives us a 20% participation rate in that bracket. And in the co-manager bracket, we have 4 such firms, giving us a 25% participation rate. I would also note that on the swap counterparty recommendation, just some clarifying language there, addressing some of your concerns, Doreen, that this group is just approved to be able to work on swaps as counterparties to any of our credits. Any new swap, termination, novation, modification would first have to come back to the committee and the full board for approval. So I wanted to make sure that was clear here. So I'm happy to take any questions on this.
Make a motion.
And a second, please. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? There you go.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next thing on our agenda is the fuel hedges.
Okay. So continuing in the committee book on Roman numeral 5-7 is a staff summary seeking authorization to execute up to $100 million in future fuel price agreements or to provide stability and budgeting for the revenue fleet fuels for MTA and all its agencies. At this point, we are working with our outside swap advisor, Swap Financial, to draft uniform documents that we would use in this. And at this point, we're not ready to lock in anything, but we're watching the market and would do so at a time in the future when the market is more favorable.
So, Pat, you're asking for authorization from the Finance Committee to execute up to $100 million worth of swaps if, at the time, subject to when you and the advisor feel it's appropriate.
Correct.
Okay. Any questions?
The budget for diesel fuel is $180 million, and there's about a $24 million budget for compressed natural gas. So this is about half, depending on whether or not you do gas or not.
Do we have any hedges outstanding now, Pat?
We do have a fuel hedge outstanding now that expires at the end of this month.
Oh, at the end of this month.
Right, and so
how's that work? I assume it worked out well, right?
Well, no,
we're up a little bit this year on this hedge.
Yeah, we're up a little bit.
We're up a couple of $1 million.
On the hedge.
On the hedge, yeah.
I'd say one of the reasons we're looking for authorization to enter in subsequently is, right now, if you think about it, fuel costs are very high. If we were to ask for permission to enter into transactions now, we'd be entering into these contracts at their peak, because you can see what happens. Maybe. Yeah, it could be. But I would say from a seasonal, maybe that's the way of putting it, kind of a seasonal peak, that obviously heating oil, which is one of the possible hedges, and natural gas, at middle of the winter is a time when people typically would think it would be higher than it might be at some other time of the year. So what we're really thinking is working with swap advisors to see if there's a better way of layering in this and picking up some savings and protection. But again, remember that the big driving factor here is not speculating. We're not trying to save a lot of money. We're trying to avoid the risk of having prices just go significantly beyond what we have in our budget, because that's our our biggest concern is trying to stabilize our budget through this program.
How long typically do the hedges lock you in for?
What we've done in the past is, the longest we've ever done is a 15-month hedge. The one that's in place now is just a 12-month hedge. So the tenor is typically, 1 year to 1.5 years. Typically, they wouldn't go out beyond that.
Buying insurance costs you money. And, we're a large operation, and we're in the business of, we buy energy to operate. If we were ever in a position where we thought we had the slack in our operation to accommodate this risk, I don't think we should be in the hedge business. I don't know that we're actually in that position at the moment. We seem to be rather knife edge in terms of being able to provide for our ongoing operations, so that I guess perhaps it could make sense in this circumstance. I think in general, it just costs you money.
Amen, brother.
Okay, but having said that,
Well, having said that, two things. I think the first time we entered into hedges, and Bob, I'm glad we're in the same wavelength on this, I had suggested to your predecessor that we ease those in and not just do one big hedge at one time, and I'm glad you see life differently. Secondly, there is derivatives reform being discussed so that we will hopefully know better at the end of it that the pricing that we're getting is less opaque. And perhaps that will fit nicely into the time frame of getting through the winter months without locking in right now. But if there is legislation, I would hope we would be able to somehow time it so that we're operating under new rules that give us greater confidence that we're not, frankly, getting screwed.
Yeah, just quickly, to maybe put a little context around this, what would you say, Bob or Pat, would be the typical practice of other large fuel users, i.e. the large trucking companies, the airlines? Is hedging common practice in those situations, or is it less popular?
With transportation issuers, particularly on the private sector side, it is something that they look at. You can kind of imagine in one sense that if there is some benefit of being, of recognizing risk as the private sector does and compensates, they're more willing to embrace this. The public sector's been slower coming around to do it. On the power side, though, Long Island Power and some of the other major issuers have a pretty substantial hedging program just because they understand that's what their risk is. So I firmly believe if we could self-hedge, if we had enough cash that we could self-hedge, it would be one thing to operate that way, but you do have to have the ability to handle that, great fluctuations, and right now we're just not in that situation. So I think it behooves us to look at it, but it's something we got to be careful about.
Over time, too, we've migrated away from the more exotic fuel sources that, quite frankly, were much we were prone to having to deal with just one supplier, and fortunately we're out of that business. So we've come to a fuel source that's as good, at least on the transit side, but we have more suppliers to choose from, which hopefully will continue to have an ameliorative effect on pricing. But I think I'm not opposed to fuel hedging, and per your point, the airlines all do it. That is, if their credit ratings allow it. Some of them, their credit ratings are so low that they can't find anyone to take the other side of the hedge. That's fortunately not our problem.
okay, so we have a motion, and I believe we have a second. So all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Got your hedges. Let's see, what's next?
We actually have a walk-in item, and that's authorization to issue transportation revenue bonds, and that's an action item.
Okay, Pat, you
Pat
want to
will.
go again then?
Yeah, this should appear on your place. This is a staff summary and a supplemental resolution to authorize the issuance of up to $750 million of transportation revenue Build America bonds. This is a program that we've talked about on numerous occasions that is expiring at the end of this year, and we had been hopeful that there would be some effort in Congress to renew the program or extend it in some way. It appears that that is not going to happen, and so we've taken a look at market rates that would enable us to get into the market before the end of the year and issue these bonds. I think there's some significant savings that could be realized to pre-fund part of our 2011 new money needs for capital. We're currently estimating about $1.65 billion in new borrowing next year. So this would cover, if we issued up to the $750 amount, about 45% of that need. As you can see from the issuance that we just did before Thanksgiving, tax-exempt rates now that we paid on that transaction were about 5.15%. The way we're seeing the market as it's sold off since then is that tax-exempt bonds right now would cost us about 5.5%, maybe more. To the extent that we could issue these Build America bonds in the current market, we would be looking at a rate of about 4.65%. And given that our budgeted assumption for transportation revenue bonds next year is 5.45%, we feel that this was the prudent thing to come to the committee, come to the board, and seek the authorization. Should market conditions continue to stay favorable, we would propose to issue the bonds around December 22nd, and then close the transaction around December 28th or 29th. So it would be a busy couple weeks ahead, but we think we can do it. We're obviously watching the market very closely and would not execute the transaction if we couldn't secure the savings that I've just discussed here.
So it's a standby authorization.
Yes, if we were to do this, we would have to mail a POS this week on Thursday to be ready.
Presumably you could...
I'm sorry to be so predictable. Two things. Are you looking at call features on this or not? Because the rates that you've set out, 5.5% tax exempt, I assume that presumes a 10-year call versus a 465, which is non-callable. What if we were to issue 10-year call BABs, for example?
Well, we think the call feature would cost us about 40 to 50 basis points, right? So it's
a 5.10 cost of funding if you were to do that. In other words, if you were to add 45 basis points to that 465, you'd have a higher cost of funds. Are you thinking that the optionality is something that we should have, or are you comfortable locking into something that's not callable?
We always look at having a standard 10-year par call and on these transactions. A couple things. One, there's less investor appetite for that than one would think, and so given the size that we're talking about here, that might be difficult to have the whole thing out there with that 10-year par call, but that's something we always look at and analyze. We ask our financial advisor to analyze that and whatever banker we're working with. You're right on. It's part of the cost of the transaction to leave the optionality on the table.
I guess it waxes, investor interest in calls waxes and wanes, so maybe if we could just make sure we're following what investor interest is and trying to get some optionality and if it makes sense.
Absolutely.
And then secondly, do you think there are going to be any investors in their offices on the 22nd? Or?
It's a fair question. I think we from what we're hearing, the feedback we're getting from our senior managers, from our financial advisors, we think there's liquidity in the market to sell the bonds probably up to Wednesday before Christmas. After that, they think the market pretty much thins out.
Well, I think if you could do it, you should, because the cost of funding almost demands it.
Thank
you. Mark? What you're talking about basically is about half your cash flow next year?
Correct.
So you have 6 months of carry, or maybe it's 3 months of carry on this. So I guess just one other thing that you should be looking at is what that's going to cost you.
We are looking at that negative arbitrage in the carry. We have commercial paper that we can continue to write. We've got about $400 million in capacity. To the extent that we were to do some or part of this BAB issuance, we would reserve that CP issuance for later in the year and use these funds first.
Yeah. That really is the analysis, because we know if we're going to pre-fund by a quarter, we're going to pay 0.25% of a higher cost interest rate. We're not earning anything on that money for that period. So that's part of the economic analysis. And the other part is we're looking at this as an opportunity to jump into the market. Everybody else should be looking at this as an opportunity to jump in the market. Some will be able to move quickly. Some have boards that will enable them to do something like this. So it's going to be a question of, when it comes time to get in the market, can we really get in and see the kind of economics that we saw at the tail end of last week or maybe today? And if we can't, that's where we're going to have to come back and go, well, if it's non-callable and the spread is very narrow, and we know we've got the cost of 1/4 of interest hitting our cash flow next year, start to weigh all of those things together.
Jim?
Bob, and Pat, I certainly would support an action of this type. I do think, though, that it would be helpful for the committee if you were a bit more forthcoming in terms of some of the particulars that have gone into the decisions, and some of the things that Doreen brought up on coal and the pre-funding issues. I mean, they're all things that you've thought about.
Right.
And to the extent that it's not screwing up our negotiating position elsewhere, I think it's useful to sort of lay it out on the table for the committee, because you just walk away feeling a whole lot better when that's done.
Point taken, Jim. And
Okay. I think that all the questions are finished, so we'd like to make a motion, please. And all in favor? Opposed? Okay. Go ahead.
Next item is MTA report and information items. And what we've done is we have the proposed 2011 Finance Committee work plan. We just show it in December, and you can look at it, and then any questions, deletions, additions, we can talk about that next month. So it's really just for your information. Moving ahead to, we have headquarter procurements, and that would 6 procurements for headquarters. Sure.
And I just read it again. Are we going to have, as part of the work plan for the Finance Committee, and I know Jeff has been talking about it, a report on the real estate portfolio and whatever recommendations are going to be made with regard to that?
Right. Let me tell you, the chairman and I have had discussions about this, and right now, actually starting in January, and Jeff, we've talked about this, there is going to be a review by management at the MTA, not real estate, and they are going to come up with basically a 5-year plan for both the leased properties and the properties we own from a business plan. And that's going to be handed down, and of course, I would assume this committee will be involved in it. And then, of course, Jeff and his people will execute the plan after the chairman has signed off on it. It's underway. It's been, the decision's been made to move forward with this. I think it's really something that needs to be done. I think Jeff needs the direction from the management. When I say management, not only Bob and Jay and the senior management, but also the operating heads of the different subsidiaries will definitely be involved in it. And it's very timely, because there's a lot of real estate decisions that have to be made over the next 5 years, and I have all the confidence that Jeff and his people will be able to execute this once the plan is put into place, and it is a priority for the first quarter. And Jay has promised me that it will be a priority, and Charlie, that it will be a priority for the first quarter.
So sometime in the first quarter, we will get a report and have to make policy
I don't know exactly when, but they're going to start working on it. There was so many things that Jay and Charlie were involved in that They just couldn't do it before the end of the year, but it's going to go on the front burner in January. So I will keep you updated,
Okay.
and Jeff, we'll keep you, the Finance Committee, appraised, because, as you know, when the board assignments were changed, we became responsible as fiduciaries for the real estate department, and we wanted to, this is one of the things we requested, and it's in the works, I assure you.
Okay.
It's top priority.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so,
Next, we have headquarter procurements. We have 6 for a grand total of $3.6 million. 4 competitive, 1 is a multi-agency with transit and MTA bus, and 2 non-competitive procurements for ratification.
okay, motion, please. Second, please. All in favor? Okay. Go ahead, Doug.
Next, we move to the Metro-North Long Island Railroad Committee. They have one action item for a Long Island Railroad capital construction. It's for the addition of an ADA elevator for the East Side Access Concourse to the regional investment portion of the 2010-2014 capital program. The elevator would serve as an accessibility improvement, and it would supplement ADA access guideline requirements for the new LIR concourse, which is designed and funded as an ADA-compliant facility.
Motion, please. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Also within that commuter committee, we have 1 non-competitive joint procurement with Long Island Railroad as the lead. The procurement is with Metro-North for a grand total of $440,000.
Motion, please. Second? All in favor?
We have 3 procurements for Metro-North, 1 multi-agency non-competitive procurement with Long Island and Transit, 1 joint competitive procurement with Capital Construction, and 1 competitive procurement for a grand total of $100,667,000.
Motion, please. Second? All in favor?
Next, we move to MTA bus operations. There are 3 non-competitive procurements for an estimated grand total of $65,142,000.
May I have a motion, please? All in favor?
There are no items for bridges and tunnels. Next, we move to New York City Transit. We have 3 procurements for transit for an estimated grand total of $28,060,000. 1 non-competitive joint procurement with B&T, 1 multi-agency competitive procurement with B&T, Long Island, MTACC, and Metro-North, 1 competitive joint procurement with Capital Construction for ratification of completed procurement actions.
Second, please. All in favor?
Lastly, we have First Mutual Transportation Assurance Company, and there are no items for FIMTAC.
Okay. MTA Consolidated Reports, I guess there's nothing on
No,
that.
it's just for information.
Right. It's an information item. So, Jeff, real estate.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. We have 7 action items this month, including a disposition of a surplus property, Long Island Railroad property in Sag Harbor, a acquisition of a temporary lease on 2nd Avenue to facilitate underpinning and provide space for contractors whose contracts will consequently reflect an absence of that cost, and 4 new leases at Grand Central. With respect to the leases at Grand Central, I would note that we have 2 incumbents who furnish the high bid, thereby fulfilling the wish of this committee. And with respect to the space that's currently occupied by super runners, I'm sorry to say that their bid was some $300,000 shy of the winning proposal from Camuto Group on a present value basis, so we recommended awarding that lease to Camuto. Finally, we have 1 item, the Joe Malone item, where in fact we went to a selection committee because the recommendation is to award to someone other than the high bidder on guaranteed rent. There's some $25,000 at stake, so it was close on rent, and the unanimous determination of the selection committee was that Joe Malone should be selected for its contributions to the retail mix in the terminal. Be glad to answer any questions about any of these items.
Okay, motion, please. Second, please. All in favor?
Thanks.
Got it.
Thank you.
Releases.
Thank you.